So then, faith, victory, and conquering. That word, the song, we just picked it out a moment ago. I was sitting with Ian and John and Jim, picking some songs out, and that's one of them. And in the song talks about a conquest or a conquering, and that's what we're going to talk about in our sermon today. So considering as we walk through our life, and considering, as I mentioned a moment ago in the adult class, about the fears and the trials and temptations, all of it that goes along that the world seems to involve themselves in, let us consider the Old Testament, Joshua, we're going to look also at Numbers, consider the fears that they had that kept them or hindered them from taking action or doing what God had asked them to do. So when we think about the fear, the fearful lose. Now I'm talking about the unhealthy fear. The fearful lose, and yet the confident win. Let me explain. There are certain difficulties that we might find ourselves involved in or stuck in our life. Fear is one of those. It's important for us to talk about fear because we see in the scriptures, God talks about it time and again. Someone counted, apparently, I don't know, I haven't done a count myself, maybe I'll pull out a concordance later on, but they counted 366 passages where fear, or some type of fear, is mentioned in the Bible. By the way, that's one for every day of the year, on a leap year. 365 normally of the years. Some suggest that fear is the reason that we're subject to lockdowns and masking up. I don't know. Might be afraid of being sick, sure. I mean, no one wants to get sick. So we want to be very careful about proper fear. Now, there was a president, FDR, in 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in his first inaugural address, and we can quote part of his statement here. But FDR puts it this way as he accepted the inauguration. So, first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he goes on to describe it. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. You're going to hear about that again in a few minutes. So he said we should convert retreat, instead of fear running away, into advance. Now the nation had been stuck in a mess back at that time, and in the midst of lacking of money and a depression. So they're trying to come out of that, and they're on the doorstep of a world war. And so we also can read, when we look at the Numbers account, Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13, if you will. And then we'll go to Joshua in a bit. But Numbers chapter 13. Now you'll find chapter 13 somewhere between chapter 12 and 14. I'll let you go ahead and find it. Take your time. We read of the root of the failure of the nation of Israel. Fear. We're going to talk about 12 spies and a people afraid. When we read at the beginning of chapter 13, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan." This is the land that was promised, a land of promise, a land flowing with milk and honey, the land that God was saying, "This is for you, I'm giving it to you. All you got to do is go in there and take it. I am giving you to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." So he's saying go, and the New King James says, spy out the land of Canaan. Go and observe and see what's going on there. See what the people are like. See what kind of farm availability is there. What can we sustain ourselves? I want you to go and see what you got. See how wonderful it is. God's saying go. And so in verse 3, Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord. So far, so good. He's following the command. All of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. And he goes and he names them through here. And you might, as you go down through that list, you'll recognize those tribes. But we'll go on here. In verse 16, these are the names of the men that Moses sent to spy out the land. And here we see Moses, in verse 16, Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. We're going to understand something here shortly about Joshua and Caleb. So anyway, he sent them out. They went out there and they found great things. Look at verse 20. They found the first grapes. They found bread in abundance. Everything was there that they needed to be sustained. So 12 spies go out. They spent 40 days doing this. I don't know. Maybe they found a good restaurant. Spent some time there. I'm not sure. They spent 40 days there. And other than being a perfect number, they came back in verse 25. They returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Verse 26. Now, they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then it changes terribly. Then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell there and dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites, the Jebusites and Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. It's where they would have to cross. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession. Why? For we are well able to overcome it. Do you see the fear stricken out amongst these others? Why were they so afraid? They were like in verse 33. And we saw giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Even though Caleb said we were well able. I mean, where was Paltai, the son of Raphu? You scratch your head. What difference does that make? He was amongst the 12. Why didn't he stand? Why didn't any of the others, the other 10, stand up and say, yeah, we got this. God is with us. Who can be against us? Let's go. Instead, they panicked. They backed off and said, well, no, we need to rethink this. We can't do this. So, what happens? They refuse to enter the nation or the land of Canaan, and God says, have it your way. You're going to wander the wilderness. You're going to get a whole 4 decades of whooping. That's what you're going to get. I don't know if he didn't put it that way, but think about that. 40 years wandering the wilderness because they wouldn't do one simple thing. So they have 40 years of education that they could gain. But don't you know, at the end of the day, only 2 of the original, some odd million, only 2 of the original came through after the 40 years and were allowed to enter into Canaan. Who were those 2, you might ask? Well, when you look in chapter 13, you'll see the 2 that said, we can do this. And in chapter 14, likewise, Joshua said, we can do it. We got this. Let's just go. Well, anyway. Their fear got the best of them. If they were well able, then why did they allow themselves to become unwilling is the question. Ask yourself that same question. This is an Old Testament account, but when we apply it today, ask yourself, if I'm well able, God is with me, who can be against me? Then why am I unwilling to do whatever it happens to be? The result was fear and despondency amongst the nation of Israel. They despaired so much that they wanted to return to Egypt. They wanted to return where it was so evil and so terrible that they wanted to escape from. And all of a sudden now they want to go back. That doesn't make a lick of sense to me. So 40 years later, as the Hebrews are now approaching Jericho, they're standing across the Jordan, God is saying, get ready to go over. You got one more chance at this. Do it right. So get ready to go over. By the way, when you think about the question, the nation of Israel, what body of water did God part and allowed them to walk across on dry land? The Red Sea. No? Yeah, that's one. The Red Sea. Look at chapter 14, you'll see also the Jordan. Same thing happened. Now let me ask you this also. The city of Jericho, which is nearby unto the Jordan River, they had heard of all these things. They had heard the reports of the Exodus, crossing the Red Sea. They had heard about that crossing. They had heard about the Hebrews' victories in the wilderness, how they could take nations and cities by God's intervention. What do you suppose the people of Jericho, when God said, or Joshua said in Joshua chapter 2, where we're going next, Joshua chapter 2, what do you suppose the people of Jericho were thinking when they saw all this, heard all these events? They saw the people coming across the Jordan. Perhaps they had spies down there watching the nation of Israel cross the Jordan on dry land again. They had to have been thinking, what is about to happen to us? Joshua said, go view the land, especially Jericho, in chapter 2, verse 8. Now, before the spies, lay down, two spies had gone into the land, and they especially went to Jericho, and they went to Rahab the harlot's house to spend the night. They lodged there, as you might read in your translation. They lodged there. Now, turns out that some of the king's guard heard about this, and so they came to him and said, hey, we've got spies amongst us. They came in last night, or during the night. Go and find them. So here's Rahab the harlot. She hides the two spies up on the roof, covers them with flax, because she was a work of fine purple. Now, before the spies lay down, Rahab came up to them on the roof, verse 9, and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted or melted away because of you. Now, do you think that they were really afraid of a ragtag army such as this nation of Israel? They were afraid, they were afraid of God's ability to take these people and take Jericho. So the terror of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea from when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven, above and on earth beneath, or earth below. Now, Rahab the harlot had heard these things, and all the people knew, but she and her family, they took it to heart and said, we got to fix something here. Look, these people are coming. Spies are in my house. Here's an opportunity for me to get things right. By the way, Rahab the harlot, of the lineage of Christ. Let's go back. Now, this passage involves a conversation between Rahab and the two spies that Joshua had sent out at the entrance to the land. Now, after Joshua had led the people of Israel across the Jordan River on dry land, here they are now, not far from Jericho. Can you imagine all these hundreds of thousands of people encamped out there? People are wondering, okay, what is going on? What is about to happen? Here she expresses the fear of all the people. But it seems interesting that all of a sudden, for all those years, the nation of Israel was afraid of those in Canaan. We saw with the 12 spies that come back and said, 10 of the 12 came back and said, they were afraid. Now, 2 spies come in and find out that side of the Jordan, the east side of the Jordan River in Canaan, they are all afraid of the nation of Israel. Funny how the tables have turned. However, looking at this group of men, or group of people that have come across in their army, these were descendants of the generation of those that died in the wilderness. So you would think, they ain't got nothing. Not so. Even though God had led them in circles, God had them wandering around the wilderness for 40 years for their unbelief, they came now and they were ready to conquer. They had failed up until now. Now the people of Jericho were afraid of the children of Israel and their God, which we just read. Joshua looked at, the outsiders looking in, the Canaanites saw that what God could do. Now they believed and feared because he was able to conquer them as well. The people of Canaan were overcome with fear as the Hebrews stood on the threshold of the promised land. Let's look back at these events. Joshua 3, as you go through, Joshua 3, 14 through 17, the children of Israel cross on dry ground. Joshua 6, 1 through 5, the instructions are given from God to Joshua to take Jericho. Joshua in turn, in Joshua 6 verse 6 gives instruction to the nation of Israel. Here's what we're going to do. You remember, we're going to march around the city one time for 6 days. And on the 7th day, we're going to blow the horns, we're going to shout, and watch what happens. In chapter 6, Joshua chapter 6, verse 15. Let's just go on over there. Joshua 6:15. But it came to pass. Now again, the army had marched around the city walls, the city of Jericho, which isn't a large, it's not like you go down to Manchester, it's the largest city in New Hampshire. It's not like that. It's big, but it's not that big. Martha and I have been there and seen the tell where they did the excavating. Here, we'll see. It came to pass, after they'd marched 6 days, on the 7th day, that they rose early, this is the nation of Israel, they rose early about the dawning of the day and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner as the first 6. On that day only, they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened when the priests blew the trumpet, that Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Now the city will be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in her house, because she hid the messengers that we sent." And he goes on and gives a warning. Don't steal anything. Don't take the spoil that's accursed, lest you become accursed. And so they went and they did that. They blew the trumpets. They shouted. And the walls collapsed inwards. Why did the walls collapse inwards? So that the army of Israel could rush in there without any hindrance. Fact is, you can see where the evidence is of the walls that had collapsed. There is some speculation about exactly where Rahab the harlot's house was. Presumably it was on the very outskirts, down where the refuse of people would live. It's on the outskirts of the walls, and there is where she and her family survived. We don't know the exact location. It was fun to go there and look at it nonetheless. So, the conquest of Jericho. All right. You see what happens when there is an event where you fear the people so much that you put God away and say, "Yeah, I'm just not going to do it. I'm afraid." And then you turn around and see where insurmountable odds the nation of Israel went up against Jericho, shouldn't have been able to take it, and yet with God, in they went. Can we not do the same thing? Well, we're going to make a couple of applications here. I'll try to make 3 of them. Let's see what happens. Matthew 28, verse 20. Turn to Matthew 28 and verse 20, please. John's going to beat us all because he's going to scroll it up on his phone real quick. John, I'm not going to ask you to read it today. So we'll look at Matthew 28 now. Matthew 28 we often refer to as the Great Commission there in Mark 16:15. Yes, it is. Jesus gives some instruction. Do this. He didn't say don't be afraid. He says do this. Starts out in verse 18. Jesus came and spoke to them. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. He's got all the power that we need to be to be comfortable in all the things he asks us to do. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. Okay, there's the commission. Go and do these things. You start to bite your nails, and you're biting on your lips saying, I don't know if I can do that. And lo, he finishes here, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. In our entire lives as Christians, he is with us always, even to the end of the age. So, when we think about, since we're in Matthew, let's turn back and go to 13, Matthew chapter 13. When you think that you're too small and insignificant to do such a thing, we look at the mustard seed. Matthew 13, verse 31. 1-3-3-1. Another parable he, or Jesus, put forth to them. So Matthew 13:31. These parables are accounts that Jesus related to them that they could understand. They understood about tending gardens or husbandry. Another parable he spoke to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds. I'll finish reading here. But when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Everything's provided for them in this little mustard seed. When you get a jar of Grey Poupon, it tastes good. Look in there, you put your sausages in it, the thing's great. Anyway, look in there, you see in the jar, the clear jar, you can see those little dark brown spots in them. Those are mustard seeds that have expanded a bit. If you buy, I've never bought or seen raw mustard seeds, but dried mustard seeds may be even smaller than that, very small. So think about that, which turns into a tree that birds can live in. Let's look at Mark chapter 4, I think is where we'll find it. Mark chapter 4, the same account. And verse 30. Yeah. Mark 4:30. Again, the parable of the mustard seed. This is Mark's account of it. Then he said, to what shall we liken the kingdom of God? Or with what parable shall we picture it? It is like a mustard seed, which, when it is sown on the ground, is smaller than all the seeds on earth. But when it is sown, it grows up and becomes greater than all the herbs and shoots out large branches so that the birds of the air may nest under its shade. There is something much bigger than you or me or any human being in the entirety of the history of the earth. There's someone that's far greater. We're reading about his words right here. Far greater than any one of us. It's the Christ. He said, lo, I'm with you unto the end of the age. And God said, we are well able, through the Holy Spirit, through Joshua, we are well able to defeat this enemy. Fear. Fear. Central idea of this is God's kingdom. No matter how small and insignificant it may seem at first, or in any one place, it will continue to expand, is what Jesus was saying to them. It will continue to expand over the earth. Here we are today. It is great. When I say great, it is big, way bigger than any government can bring upon you, any army can bring upon you, or any surrounded wall can prevent you from. We can have it. This parable might tell us to have patience, to exercise our faith, to keep on praying, keep on working, because God's plan cannot fail. The two spies spoke with Rahab. They learned that the people of Canaan feared them. You suppose they were surprised? Because of the change of events? Sure. What groups today, in today's modern time, might be afraid of God? No, not asking you to make a list, but in your spare time, maybe you want to sit down, maybe this afternoon even, sit down and say, Who doesn't fear? Who doesn't care about God? Who says he doesn't exist? Well, there's a large group right there. Now, which other ones say they're not sure if he exists? Well, there's another large group. Which ones don't care whether he exists or not? There's a large group. All of a sudden, you whittle it way down to a very finite group of people. Which ones then, based on those, believe in his word? We hear from a lot of Christians today about their fear. You might say, you know what I fear? I fear blank. I'm sure that each one of us might be able to write in there, this is what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of the Great Commission. Some might be afraid they're going to die of the virus. It's a substantial fear. We lost a good friend some time ago. You might be afraid that you're going to go out on the highway here, drive up and down somewhere, and somebody's going to run you over. It's not a drunk driver. Just run you right off the road, and you end up waking up dead. Well, let's not forget that someday we're going to die of something. Doesn't matter. It could be old age. I'm working toward 99, by the way, just so you know. We need to stop fearing and start living for God. When fear of things in the world paralyzes us, we should think of these people here. Yeah, we read the account where they're afraid, and God, they suffered as a result. But when we do what God asks, it seems quite simple. Let the spirit of fear not rule over our spirit of faith. Matthew, chapter 17. Matthew 17, if you want to turn back there. Oops. There we go. 19 through 21. Now, the brethren or disciples are trying to cast out an unclean spirit. Matthew 17, 19. When the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out, an unclean spirit?" When Jesus said, "You're not doing it right," and he cast it out. "Why could we not cast it out?" And Jesus said to them, "Because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you'll say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." He goes on to tell them, "However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting." Prayer and fasting so you get your mind set, or your mind straight, and then attack your greatest fears. It seems that when we act in faith over fear, God prevails. They will look at us. If somebody outside the church, if somebody who's not a Christian looks at you and says, "Wait a minute, if you're afraid of this God, then how can I believe there is a God?" Careful, because they're watching you. They're watching you. If you show fear, they say don't show fear in front of a dog, he'll attack. Maybe so. You show fear of what God has asked us to do, then don't expect anybody to believe that what you have to say is important. When we fall to fear, we don't glorify God. No one cares. So then, the spirit of fear at Jericho was an indicator of the coming conquest. Looking at Joshua, when we consider again Joshua chapter 2 verse 9, Rahab said, "I know the Lord has given you this land." God has given us the way unto salvation. We can have it. We don't need to be afraid of anything. Look at these guys. Fear conquered the Hebrews in an entire generation and wandered the wilderness. Fear conquered Jericho because they were afraid. Then God said, "Go do this." They overcame. Too many of us are fearful of too many things like radical and unscriptural movements that go on in the world and in our own country. Fear of being too political or too politically incorrect might be a righteous fear. Fear of a virus. The whole world is afraid of this. Just take precautions. Fear of offending someone with words about God's plan of salvation. Does that make you afraid? Even with your own family? So if fear prevails over faith, what's the outcome? Faith fails. Fearful churches and fearful Christians will be conquered and both will fall. However, Good news is faith over fear, much as Rahab had and the nation of Israel had, faith over fear prevails over all. Finally, we are well able to overcome and learn from our fears, our trials, our worries, our anxieties, as we read in Proverbs 12 today. We're not told to go into our room. Think about when you're told to go and pray, Matthew 6. I want you to look at, you don't have to look at it now. When you have the time, look at Matthew 6. How should we pray then? They asked Jesus. Go into your room, close the door, and shudder in fear and anxiety and worry, right? Don't do anything. Don't do anything because, well, you might get something done. No, we're taught to go in and pray for ourselves, pray for others, pray for thanks, pray for forgiveness. Matthew 6:6. Congregations and Christians that are filled with faith over fear, then we will advance God's kingdom. And so, the command is, keep the faith, let the Father force out the fear, if I can use F a lot of times. Keep the faith. Let the Father force out the fear. That's it. I mean, it's pretty simple. Open a word, open a cookbook, you learn how to make cupcakes. You open a map, you see how to get from here to there. You open this book and it's going to show us how to get from this life to life eternal with God in heaven. If you'd like the prayers of the congregation, if you'd like more instruction on how to do that, then let us know today. And right now is our opportunity. Why don't you stand as we sing this song, Higher Ground.